welcome everyone. Thank you for joining OHS Canada for this special conversation on mitigating contractor risk across multiple sites in partnership with Alcumus. I'm joined today by Erica Zeffiro, an industry expert at Alcumus. Erica creates safer workplaces by collaborating with major companies across Canada to implement tools and best practices when working with contractors. The program she puts together focus on improving efficiencies, reducing costs, and elevating contractor performance. So before we get into our conversation today, just a couple of housekeeping items. You, the audience, are in listen-only mode. That means we cannot hear you or see you, but we definitely want to hear from you. You can enter your questions at any time using the Q&A box, which you'll find on the bottom of your Zoom webinar control panel. Today's conversation is also being recorded. You will receive a link to this session at the email that you used to register for today's webinar, so keep an eye out for that. So let's get into it. Erica, welcome. I'm thrilled to be speaking with you today. It's nice to have you join us.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, so my first question for you is, what challenges do your clients face when managing contractors across multiple sites?
Great question. Managing, in general, managing one site can be a challenge for many clients. However, adding client corporations with multiple sites, in my opinion, the strength is their struggle at the same time. So what I mean by that is, despite having successful business, the ability to operate, multiple sites all at the same time, it's quite complex for hiring clients to manage their contractors across these multiple sites or even many business units within one site. So that just adds to it. What the difficulty is in managing it internally is the visibility over the contractors entering these multiple sites is increasingly difficult. And so managing these multiple units or multiple sites, the risk is incredibly increased, as well as the administrative burden that the hiring client staff has, essentially. So, for example, in terms of safety risks, some clients I have worked with struggled to manage internally. And so what they did was, implement bare bones measures to mean minimums, minimum compliance standards, minimum regulatory standards. And so the danger of doing this is clients can potentially be hiring contractors who can put their business at risk only to have only verified minimum requirements. And so the financial impact of not having this visibility is major. And so the more sites a client has, the more risk of exposure and of losing that incredible investment that was made in opening and operating those sites. And so that was one. The administrative burden is also quite a heavy challenge to manage over multiple sites. As many of you on the call probably know, it's huge to have to manage this internally. And so it's something that many client corporations don't have the time or the resources to manage effectively. So they are managing them, but not really well and not really effectively, and it's not streamlined. And so from experience, the clients I work with, take on average 8 hours every year to onboard one contractor into the business and 5 hours consistently updating the contractor's pre-qualification paperwork. And so if what that equates to in terms of numbers is, so some of my clients have, let's say, between 100 and 200 contractors. So that can equal over 3,000 hours on pre-qualification alone every single year for one. So for all of those. So it's precious time that employees of client corporations can use to be working on other important projects within the business that they wouldn't have the time to do if they're doing that management internally. And so this is why many hiring client corporations implement digital solutions to increase the visibility of their contractors, ensure streamlined processes are being adhered to over these multiple sites, as well as save that precious time and resources by going digital. So that was a really long-winded way of saying some of the challenges of having contractors over multiple sites is limited visibility over their supply chain and obtaining and maintaining that operational efficiency. So, and then both are even more challenging when managed internally and with manual processes.
Yeah, no, that's well said, Eric. I think, if you think about, obviously it's very complicated when you've got all these different sites, all these different contractors that you're working with. So if you go a little bit more into detail about, what adds to the complexity of having multiple sites?
Yeah, so stemming from the challenges of the lack of visibility and operational efficiency over these multiple sites, the multiple sites increases the risk of operating non-compliantly, essentially. But the most significantly to me anyway is, injuries or accidents and fatalities on site. And so at the very least, the complexity of ensuring you're operating compliantly is multiplied when a client has multiple sites, and even more so when those sites have different risks and operational requirements within each of those sites. So every site can have different complexities and risks going on at the same time. And so compliance and due diligence with safety regulations and requirements is critical to the protection and the success of the business. And so hiring clients are responsible for ensuring that every contractor who comes to work on their sites are acting in line with these regulatory requirements. So CORE, OHSA, the Labor Code of Canada, etc. So within multiple sites, it is increased because those sites may be over different locations geographically as well. So local requirements can be different as well. So I won't go into great detail on federal or local legislation. It's not the topic today. But while safety regulations have been in place for Canada for quite some time, we can't ignore the emergence of new legislation. So what's coming down the line now is more and more ESG legislation and requirements. And so the clients I speak with are facing increasing pressure to demonstrate both their business and contractor network are operating in line with ESG requirements. And so this just adds to the complexity of managing and operating multiple sites. So you might want to ask me, what is ESG exactly? What areas does ESG cover? So for those on the call who might not know, ESG is environmental, social, and government, so corporate governance. And it includes areas like environmental, carbon tracking, demonstrating social value, and increasingly what we're seeing now is forced labor. And so what's coming in January 2024 is the Fighting Against Forced Labor and Child Labor in Supply Chains Act. So that is coming in force in January 2024, which is not very far away. So for those who don't know that it's coming, we need to prepare for that if you're in the health and safety space. And so clients will need to legally demonstrate that they have a process in place for identifying and mitigating forced labor practices for any business within their supply chain. And so when I talk about ESG, I get a lot of, but we're in 2023, it's the Western world. Is forced or child labor even still a thing? And it's absolutely, it is the case. So I'll give you a quick example. Ralph Lauren, a famous fashion brand for those who may not know, was recently in the media due to allegations of forced labor. And so in the end, it was discovered that, okay, it wasn't Ralph Lauren who specifically violated these laws, but it was one of the contractor companies they hired overseas. And so it was the contractor that had the forced labor practices in place. However, it was ultimately Ralph Lauren who made news headlines, suffered reputational damage, and then, cascading into these immeasurable financial impacts that came from that. Even if it was confirmed that it wasn't them and it was a hired contractor. So all of it could have been avoided had they had total visibility of the supply chain and everyone that they are hiring. And so this example highlights the complexity of having a large corporation with multiple sites and business units, operating across countries and continents. However, the same reality exists with small to medium-sized companies I work with. So many of the clients know who they're hiring because they see them physically, or they might know them locally or regionally. However, many wouldn't know the source of materials. Where do they come from? without a firm ESG requirement or questionnaire in place that you're asking of these contractors, it's very difficult to track that complete supply chain. And some of the contractor companies that they hire, they wouldn't even know themselves because they wouldn't have thought to even ask those questions. So more and more this is coming in the legislation, and more adds to the complexities and the challenges to having multiple sites, because multiple sites meaning hiring more contractor companies and just exposing the risk even further. So coming back to how this relates to operating compliantly, the high level of due diligence required when hiring contractors is difficult to achieve, and it just adds to that complexity. So keeping up with that ever-changing legislative requirements further adds to that as well. Aside from that, there are the possible differences in legislation that I spoke of earlier, having sites across multiple regions or countries. So we know hiring, corporations are responsible for ensuring every contractor comes to work is acting in line with local, regulatory requirements, core, OSHA, sorry. And so, for example, in OHSA, the employer is required to take every precaution reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of the worker. Now, all provinces have this in some form, even, the Canada Labor Code, excuse me. All of this to say is that while they're federal standards, managing those regional standards across all of those sites is an increased challenge that many clients face, and they don't really realize that until they're in it. So my job with my clients is to speak to them about that beforehand while they're putting these policies, these procedures in place, because it is increasingly important. It was important years ago when no one really knew what it was, but this legislation is coming, and it's coming quite soon. So more and more of my conversations are revolving around this. And so the last point I kind of want to say about the added challenge of managing contractors over multiple sites is the risk of injuries or fatalities on site. And so trying to control the risk of incidents, on site is difficult when you have lack of visibility and control of who's working on that site. The work they're carrying out, the duration of that work, that increases with the scope of the company and where those sites are located geographically. And so that risk is increased with every site that is open with that is in operation, rather. And so I do have some figures that I wanted to provide to you, Todd. So over the last 5 years, there's been 90,000 incidents, 709 fatalities, 17,000 hospitalizations, 2,800 amputations. And what I found of significance is that actually fatality rates of Canadians due to workplace incidences have risen almost 10% in the last 5 years. So a lot of the clients I speak with, they think it's on a decline, and they ask me, why would we put digital solutions in place? Why do we need to streamline this? We do it really well in-house. A robust contractor management procedure, streamlined and optimized throughout all those sites and business units, is the only way, and it is vital to ensure anyone who comes onto the sites return home safely. And so ensuring zero incidents is the largest added complexity of managing those multiple sites, in my humble opinion, because essentially that's really what everyone wants, is to do the work and come home safely.
That's great, Eric. And I think you raised some really important, the example you gave was a great one in terms of how that can impact organizations. And I think to your point earlier, if we were to talk about every jurisdiction in Canada, we'd have to do about a dozen webinars to get all that
Absolutely.
done.
Absolutely.
There's a lot to stay on top of, which kind of leads me to my question. If you think about, this is challenging. This is a challenging thing for organizations to do. So, in your opinion, in your experience, why do your clients find it so challenging?
So there are many. We can speak about this all day, but what I found is all of the challenges and complexities that we've kind of spoken about so far, ultimately impact the information hiring clients need to obtain from their contractors who are coming onto their 1, 2, 5, 25 sites. And so for most hiring clients, and most definitely all the clients I have spoken with and potential clients and acquaintances, part of that challenge is effectively understanding the variables or the drivers that can impact the level of information required from contractors. So what those drivers are very different depending on who you're speaking with. But in my experience, there are kind of two. One is legislative and one is confidence-based. So I'll explain what confidence-based is in a second, or what I consider confidence-based. But legislative drivers, are the obligation to local or federal legislation ensuring proper management and oversight of contractors. And like you said, they can vary by region, countries. In the Western world, most will have strict health and safety regulations, but not only health and safety regulations. It's encompassed by employment laws, environmental regulations, data privacy and security regulations. So all of the information that you're collecting on these contractors, there is oversight of that as well within the law. So there's those legal drivers that affect what information you're obtaining for the contractors across your many sites, but also what I call the confidence-based drivers. So that's specific to each hiring client. And so do you know enough about the contractor that you're hiring for them to execute these tasks and these jobs? So ultimately hiring clients would ask the contractor company to comply with their own set of requirements, to have kind of the confidence to say, okay, there's a very low risk that this contractor can cause my company, my employees, my site, any sort of damage, whether that's financial, reputational, etc. So the confidence to say, I'm hiring the right person. So that's kind of the confidence-based driver that would, be more challenging. And going back to the challenge of collecting and managing contractor information effectively, many of my clients who have a manual process, data for each of those sites exist in silos. So they're entered pen and paper on an Excel sheet sometimes, saved on someone's specific desktop. So if they're not there, it's not available. Information that's put in a filing cabinet, all with the hope that the information is well organized and easily retrievable. So we like to say here, hope is not a plan. So it might be great in intention, but it rarely lends to a good outcome. And so that manual process can lead to unreliable data, mistakes that could have been very easily avoidable, and an administrative burden causing stress to those who are tasked with, consistently updating those records. And so when I speak to people a bit higher up in the hiring clients, like, oh, we have a manual process, it's going great. And very often when I speak to those lower levels, so the people entering that data and tasked with continuously verifying that data, it's a different story. And so the only way to overcome that stress and that challenge is to digitize the contractor data, reduces the obstacles I just mentioned. And the hiring clients, and this is the benefit really, is they're able to access and decipher updated contractor information in real time, allows them for a quicker analysis of that data. Reporting is much easier, and decisions are based on information that is available at the fingertips. So adding multiple sites is just adding that complexity. And how do you manage all of that when you have 10 sites with thousands of contractors coming through your doors? It's quite a feat to overcome if you're doing that manually. And so that is really a big challenge for many clients that I speak with.
No, for sure. And I've been, excuse me, I've been covering workplace safety for a long time. So I won't tell you how old I am, Erica, but I've certainly been out and about in the field enough to see that, when I first started, paper-based was very common. Like the file cabinet, kind of the storage place. I think most filing cabinets, they're getting pretty dusty now. You did run through a lot of the benefits of digitizing and centralizing this content.
Yes.
But maybe you can talk just a little bit more about that in terms of, what does that look like for the actual, professional in the, like, how do they actually do that? And how does that work with your system?
Absolutely. So within the context of having multiple sites, because even one has its own benefits, but specifically across multiple sites, the standardization across the organization is absolutely the main benefit. So yeah, I spoke about other things earlier, but it is the main benefit to say, I have the same process throughout my business. We all inherently have our own standards, our own biases, which can lead to, each site doing it better than the other. One site not following procedure because either they're misinformed, or they didn't hear the information, or they didn't receive the information, or it's on a procedure document that's put on in the main site, but not in the annexes. So I would say that's the main one. And especially with our solution helps you do that. But centralizing processes and systems ensures everyone within those sites, no matter how large or how small, is working against the same standards. And so without this solution, a digital solution, it's increasingly harder and harder to manage for the client, and to be able to obtain that standardization across their sites. Increasingly so, the more sites you have. So aside from standardizing the process across the sites, most of my clients have their own safety managers for each site. So it's not just one safety manager for the whole company, but for each individual site. So different logistics, different induction processes, specific hazards specific to one site over another. So having that single source of truth about all of this can be beneficial. And you really can't achieve that without digitizing and centralizing all of this contractor data, which is what our solution offers. But it truly is impossible without this. And even if a company, I have clients that say, oh, well, we've invested heavily and we do this in-house. Chances are you are employing many, many, many individuals to obtain this level of standardization. Whereas, like I said before, those efforts can be put into other more impactful areas of the business instead of, just outsourcing this and giving it to experts who are doing this day in and day out.
Great. And I just want to remind the audience, I'm keeping an eye on the Q&A box. We've got some questions coming in, but we want to keep those going. So if you have questions for Erica, please submit those using the Q&A box. So I kind of want to talk now a little bit about the consequences of not doing this properly, right? So from what you've seen, what's the impact of not getting it right?
I can take the whole 30 minutes or hour or 50 hours and then some to talk about this. But not only the impact of not getting it right, but not digitizing contractor management in general. At the end of the day, to me, it always goes back to the human being. And so the biggest, most important risk my clients are looking to safeguard against, someone coming onto one of their sites and has a severe accident or death because they haven't been asked to perform a task, or they have been asked to perform a task that is outside of their capability. They've misunderstood the complexities of a specific site. So that's the importance of an induction training course. Didn't have access to the right training. The list can really go on and on and on and on. I truly am not sure that any hiring corporation would want to have their business associated with a health and safety incident, let alone one that involved harm to anyone on their watch. Because they really are on their watch. As much as they're hiring contractor companies who have their own employees, they are still having these people come onto their site. They have a duty to get it right, essentially. So I was researching a little bit, and I came across a survey that said almost 20% or 21% of Canadian businesses, do not offer safety or orientation programs, despite them being legally required for new workers in much of the country. I do have to say I was a little bit surprised by that figure, especially for Canadian businesses. Most of the clients or companies that I come across, they do have it in some form. I was surprised that number was was quite high in terms of having nothing in place. And so when this is happening, when you're not getting it right, when you're not putting these things in place, there's a cascading effect of exposure for hiring clients that can be easily and significantly reduced with certain steps. You don't have to also, for a small company, you don't have to have a robust contractor management solution. There is smaller versions that you can, there's applications, things like that you can use to mitigate these effects of not getting it right. So some of the impacts of not getting it right, I mean, there's many, but if you want to talk about business impacts, so the impact of getting caught not operating in line with compliance is huge. So, businesses can face prosecution, fines, a tarnished brand reputation. So it's important when you're trying to protect people. So for me, the human aspect is quite important. But as a business person, you also want to protect and grow your business, right? So there's that as well. And what we've actually seen is there's an increase in cost to businesses by almost 10% due to the cost of worker injuries in Canada. And so businesses are exposed to increased cost, but yet some of them are not doing anything at all to mitigate those. And so an example I came across an example where July last year, a school division pleaded guilty to failing to ensure a machine was equipped with the appropriate safeguards needed to prevent a worker from coming to contact with parts of a machine that would cut material. And so the court never even referenced the contractor. It fined the school district and the school division without mention to any fine to the contractor. So not only are these financial losses, there's reputational impacts, and that would affect the ability to, maybe not the school division, but other contractors to win business in the future. All of these things keep coming up. The example with Ralph Lauren earlier. Maybe think twice before you buy from Ralph Lauren. All of these things will impact the business, and it's not just the onus is on the hiring client, not necessarily the contractor. And so with a construction company, they were also found negligent in British Columbia. A crane collapsed and left 6 contractors dead. And it's my experience that many hiring clients are shocked to hear this because they believe it's the contractor company who is ultimately responsible for either the mistakes or any incidents that happen on a hiring client site. But what we've seen is the opposite. It is the hiring client who is held responsible from the legislative perspective, but also held accountable by the people, by the media. It's them who are headlined. It's not the contractor. It is not the individual employee. They are suffering that consequence of the hiring client not doing that right, not putting the proper things in place to make sure that everyone is safe. So increasingly important to ensure that the hiring clients are making the effort to maintain visibility across their supply chain and all their contractors, because ultimately it is them that are responsible. I feel like I have a lot of stats today. I have one more that's kind of just in my head. That's quite important, actually. And I'll conclude on this question by saying we found that despite what we've asked, we've done a lot of market research, and a lot of clients are saying, they realize that it's a top priority to have contractor visibility across the supply chain. But 69, almost 70% of them admit they do not have total visibility of their supply chain and of their contractors and where those materials are coming from. And it's just interesting because them admitting that it's a priority, but most aren't improving that process at the end of the day. We've seen incidents involving contractors are 2 to 3 times higher than full-time employees because the clients are putting more focus into their own employees because that's where they think their responsibility lies. And so what this tells us is we have a lot of work to do in ensuring proper contractor management and making sure that the hiring clients ultimately understand that they are responsible at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, Erica, you cited some good stats and some unfortunate stories. It's one of the bad parts of this business is you never have to dig too far to find a story, but that's what we're trying to change, right? That's what OHS Canada is trying to do. That's what Alchemist is trying to do. It's a very good lead into the next question, which is what can you do to mitigate these risks?
Absolutely. So there's many things, and at the end of the day, accidents do happen. As many safeguards are put in place, accidents happen. And so just mitigating these risks and making sure that the proper steps are put in place helps you with peace of mind. You've done everything you possibly can to make sure, but accidents sometimes are accidents. That's why they are called accidents, right? So, but without going into too many details, we have kind of three stages of effective contractor management that I kind of help with my clients implement within their organizations and for their contractors. So the first one is an important one is the pre-qualification stage. So ensuring everyone is compliant before ever coming onto their site. So I will help them establish what the requirements are, establish, the different areas that contractors can go work within the facility, understanding what their legislative requirements are, depending on where they are located geographically. So we are constantly making sure that we have the framework in place to be able to say, okay, now we have a contractor company coming on board, which leads to step number 2 is what site inductions are you requiring? So what I mean by site inductions is, we're hiring a new contractor company to come. What am I having him look at or watch or read prior to coming onto site or while he's standing at my gate? What does he have to know? And then cascade into, onboarding steps, including, permits to work. What are we putting in place to make sure, we have specific task requirements and really ensuring that every employee of that contractor company that you're hiring is meeting those requirements at the most specific levels. So not just, contractors that are meeting basic minimums and those bare minimums that I said earlier, but really going down to those specific jobs and the specific tasks that each employee will be covering. And then third, the ongoing performance management, ensuring that contractors and their employees are continuously qualified to work. So it's all great that we onboard them and we do these site inductions and we're doing all of this initial work, but it's no good if there's nobody that's continuously checking that the permits are still valid and the insurances are up to date. And, a contractor's employee was asked to do a specific task. Are they trained for that specific task? Are they well trained for that specific task? And do we have visibility on where he got training and when that was done and if it's still up to date? So those are kind of the three. Of course, this is very high level, but those are essentially the three stages that can help ensure that we are effectively mitigating the risks mentioned prior.
Thanks, Erica. I think that was a good overview. So maybe we'll give you a bit of a chance now. We've heard about your expertise and what you offer. Yeah. But what can Alchemist do? How can Alchemist help with this situation?
So as you can see on the screen, there's a bit of a summary, but digitizing contractor management. So we are a digital solution, and this is the best way to manage and control contractor risk. Exactly what we do here at Alchemist. So helping clients implement a contractor management solution that is tailored to the unique needs of their business and the contractors is what I help with clients, but other professionals within the organization. And so we don't only help implement these solutions, so that's kind of where I come in, but we do have health and safety professionals that know the business, are up to date on the rules and regulations, and truly help our hiring clients maintain that continual qualification of their contractors. And so our solution is online, available 24/7, helps the clients gain that one single view and control of compliance of contractors working across at one site, but across multiple sites as well, and the risk across the entire business. So we help the clients move away from pen and paper, the Excel sheet approach, to a digital solution where all the contractor data can be captured, stored, and managed in one place. And so, like you said before, Todd, pen and paper was kind of the standard many years ago. So there are still companies today, small or large, that have a manual process, and our expertise is really helping them move to a digital transformation. And we help them every step of the way, as well as the contractor. So we do have a keen sense of responsibility to making sure the contractor is well aware of the requirements as well for the hiring clients. So we also help the contractor get on board and provide all of the documentation. And some of those contractors are smaller, mom and pop, and they need the help. So we also help them as well in terms of digitizing their process as well. Within our process, without getting too detailed, helps automate and limit access to work sites and the multiple facilities, limiting it only to contractors who are authorized and qualified to be on site. So making sure everyone that comes on site is qualified to do so. Contractor performance evaluations to identify the most common contractor risks, and putting corrective and preventative actions in place based on that information that our solution helps you capture. And essentially, by using our solution, you ensure contractors are not cutting any corners, are fully aware of your requirements before they step foot on your site. And like I said, have that oversight and making sure that the people who are coming onto your site that you are responsible for are compliant to the client's requirements, as well as legislation.
Great, thanks, Erica.
In a nutshell.
No, that's very, very well said. And I learned a lot today. I always learn a lot talking to you. So it's so nice to have you on here. So I think that's going to kind of bring us to the end of the presentation. So on behalf of OHS Canada, I just want to thank you for taking the time to share your expertise with our audience. Just a reminder to the audience that you will receive a link to this recording at the same email address that you used to register. Keep an eye out for that. Also, all the questions that you've been sending in today, we're going to flip over to the team at Alcumus. They'll review those. They'll be back in touch shortly with an answer. So look for a reach out for them. So yeah, that brings us to the end. So thank you everyone for joining us today. On behalf of OHS Canada and Alcumus, we wish you all a safe rest of your day.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone.
Bye.